When you hear the word Viking, what image appears in your mind? For most, it is a horned helmet, a blood-soaked axe, and a bearded brute screaming across a windswept beach toward a burning monastery. This image, burned into popular culture by Victorian art and Hollywood epics, is one of the most enduring and misleading stereotypes in all of history. The truth is far more fascinating. The Viking Age, spanning roughly from 793 to 1066 CE, was a transformative period that reshaped Europe and beyond. The people we call Vikings, primarily originating from what are now Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, were far more than simple raiders. They were farmers and fishermen, skilled craftspeople and poets, explorers who reached North America centuries before Columbus, and traders whose networks stretched from the Caspian Sea to the shores of Greenland. The word Viking itself was not an ethnic identity, but an occupation. It described someone who went on a sea-borne expedition, essentially a pirate. For most Scandinavians of the era, being a Viking was a part-time job, a seasonal venture, while their true lives were rooted in the soil and the sea of their homelands. In this article, we will strip away the myths and journey into the real world of the Norse. We will walk through their farms, sail in their legendary longships, explore their complex social hierarchy, and delve into the rich mythology of gods and giants that gave meaning to their lives. This is the story of the Vikings, not just as warriors, but as people. To understand the Vikings, we must first understand the lands that shaped them. Scandinavia is a region of dramatic contrasts. The long, indented coastline of Norway, the vast forests and fertile plains of Sweden, and the low-lying, sandy terrain of Denmark. The sea was not a barrier, but a highway. With mountains dividing much of Norway and Sweden, travel by water was often easier than travel by land, fostering a culture that was intimately connected to the ocean from the very beginning. Life here was demanding. The growing season was short, and the harsh northern winters tested the resilience of every family. This environment produced a people who were resourceful, self-reliant, and deeply connected to the cycles of nature. The skills required for survival, farming, fishing, hunting, and crafting, were the same skills that would make them such effective settlers and explorers. The Viking Age did not begin with a single event, but the raid on the monastery of Lindisfarne off the Northumbrian coast in 793 CE is often cited as its symbolic starting point. To the Christian scholars who recorded it, it was an apocalypse. Heathen men miserably destroyed God's church at Lindisfarne by rapine and slaughter. For the Norse, it was an opportunity. They had discovered that the wealthy, undefended religious houses of the British Isles were treasure troves of gold, silver, and enslaved people, all guarded by monks who could not fight back. But why did they begin to leave their homelands in such unprecedented numbers? The reasons were complex and varied. Population pressure may have made farmland scarce. The consolidation of power by ambitious chieftains and early kings may have pushed younger sons, who stood to inherit little, to seek their fortune elsewhere. And the lure of the vast trade networks of Europe and the East, rich with silver and exotic goods, was simply irresistible. They were not just raiders. They were explorers, traders, and settlers seeking a better life. When Vikings did go to war, they were formidable opponents, but they were not an army of uniformed professional soldiers. A Viking warband was a personal retinue, bound to a chieftain or king by oaths of loyalty and the promise of plunder. Weapons of war. A Viking warrior's weapons were his most prized possessions, often passed down from father to son as heirlooms. A high-quality sword was a symbol of status and immense wealth. Pattern-welded blades, created by forging together twisted rods of iron, were works of art as much as weapons, and only the richest warriors, the jarls and chieftains, could afford them. The weapon of the common man was the axe. In its simplest form, it was a farm tool, but in the hands of a warrior, it became a devastating weapon. Specialized battle axes, with broad, thin blades, could deliver terrible, crushing blows. The spear was another ubiquitous weapon, effective for both throwing and thrusting. Bows and arrows were also used, particularly in the opening stages of a battle, to weaken the enemy lines from a distance. Armor and the shield wall, the image of the Viking in heavy plate armor, is pure fantasy. Armor was expensive and rare. Most warriors relied on a simple, round wooden shield for protection. Wealthier men might wear a padded leather tunic, while the elite could afford a mail coat. A shirt of interlinked iron rings that offered excellent protection, but was laborious and costly to produce. Helmets were also used, but the popular image of the horned helmet is a complete fiction, invented by 19th-century costume designers for a Wagner opera. The few Viking helmets ever found are simple, functional iron or leather caps, often with a nose guard. Viking battle tactics were based on discipline and cohesion. Their primary formation was the shield wall, Skjaldborg. Warriors would lock their shields together, side by side, creating a formidable wall of wood and iron. From behind this wall, they would thrust with spears and strike with swords. It was a test of collective will. The side that held its nerve and pushed hardest would break the enemy's formation, leading to a rout. There were no prisoners in these battles. Those who could not flee were cut down where they stood. The berserkers. No discussion of Viking warriors is complete without mentioning the infamous berserker. The word means bear shirt in Old Norse, and these warriors were said to fight in a trance-like fury, howling like animals, foaming at the mouth, and impervious to pain and fire. They wore the skins of wolves or bears instead of armor, and were believed to be possessed by the spirits of those animals, or granted superhuman powers by Odin, the god of war and ecstasy. Whether these accounts are literal or metaphorical is debated by historians. It is possible the berserkers worked themselves into a psychological frenzy before battle. Some have suggested they may have consumed hallucinogenic mushrooms. What is clear is that they were both feared and respected, a terrifying shock troop whose very presence could break an enemy's morale. To go berserk in modern English still means to lose control in a wild rage. The Viking Age would have been impossible without the longship. These were not just boats. They were masterpieces of naval engineering, the fastest and most versatile ships of their time. Built using the clinker method, where overlapping planks were nailed to a sturdy keel, longships were both light and incredibly flexible. This elastic construction allowed them to ride the waves of the open ocean without breaking apart. Their shallow draft, the depth of the hull below the water, was their secret weapon. A longship needed less than a meter of water to float, meaning it could sail up rivers, penetrate deep into enemy territory, and be hauled up onto any beach for a lightning-fast raid. A longship was powered by both a large, square sail, made of wool, and by oars. This gave it unmatched maneuverability. In a calm, or when navigating a narrow river, the crew could simply row. The ships were decorated with intricate carved animal heads, often dragons or serpents, on the prow, which is why the English called them dragon ships. These fearsome figureheads were meant to ward off evil spirits and terrify the enemy. For longer voyages carrying cargo and settlers, the Norse used a different type of vessel, the Nor, or Na. These were broader, deeper, and more reliant on sail power than oars. They were the workhorses of the Viking world, carrying livestock, timber, grain and traded goods across the treacherous North Atlantic to Iceland, Greenland and beyond. When a Viking was not raiding or trading, he was at home, living a life of hard, physical labor. The vast majority of the Norse population were farmers, the social pyramid. Viking society was rigidly hierarchical, divided into three main classes. The king, konunga, at the top was the king, who ruled over a region and was expected to be a great warrior, a wise judge, and a generous lord, rewarding his followers with treasure and land. The jarls, nobles. Below the king were the powerful chieftains and wealthy landowners known as jarls. They controlled large estates, commanded their own war bands, and competed with each other for power and influence. The carls, freemen. The vast majority of the population were carls, free men and women. They were the farmers, fishermen, craft workers, and merchants who formed the backbone of society. They owned their own land, or rented it, had legal rights, and could carry weapons. The thralls, slaves. At the bottom were the thralls, enslaved people who were considered property. They performed the hardest, dirtiest jobs on the farm and had no rights whatsoever. They could be bought, sold, or even killed by their masters. However, a thrall could sometimes earn or be granted their freedom, becoming a freedman, and eventually their descendants could become carls. Daily life was a constant round of chores. The men worked the fields, tended livestock, fished, hunted, and maintained their tools and weapons. The women managed the household, cooking, brewing ale, making cheese, spinning wool, weaving cloth and sewing clothes. They were the keepers of the keys and held significant authority within the domestic sphere. Children helped from a very young age, learning the skills they would need as adults, law and order. The Vikings were not a lawless people. They had a sophisticated system of governance based on the thing, an assembly of free men. Regular things were held at a local level to settle disputes, trade goods, and make community decisions. The most important was the Althing in Iceland, a national gathering held annually. At the thing, laws were recited from memory by a law speaker, and disputes were judged by a panel of the most respected men. There was no police force. Justice was a private matter. A man who was wronged had to seek compensation or vengeance himself, with the support of his family. This could lead to blood feuds that lasted for generations. For the most serious crimes, the thing could declare a man an outlaw, stripping him of all protection and allowing anyone to kill him with impunity. The Vikings' worldview was shaped by their religion, a rich and complex polytheistic system we now call Norse mythology. It was not a religion of dogma and scripture, but of stories, rituals, and a deep connection to the natural and supernatural worlds. Their myths explained the creation of the world, its structure, and its inevitable fiery end. The pantheon, the Norse gods were not distant, all-powerful beings. They were flawed, mortal, and relatable, with human emotions and weaknesses. They were divided into two main families, the Aesir and the Vanir. The Aesir, the primary family of gods associated with war, sovereignty, and power. Their chief was Odin, the All-Father, a one-eyed god of wisdom, poetry, and death, who hung himself from the world tree Yggdrasil for 9 days to gain the knowledge of the runes. His son, Thor, was the champion of mankind. He was the god of thunder, strength, and fertility, who protected Midgard, the world of humans, from the giants with his mighty hammer, Mjolnir. Tyr was the original god of war and justice, known for his bravery in sacrificing his hand to bind the wolf Fenrir. The trickster god Loki, though technically of giant descent, lived among the Caesar, causing endless trouble with his schemes, the consequences of which would ultimately lead to Ragnarok. The Vanir, a second family of gods associated with fertility, prosperity, and nature. The most prominent were Njord, the god of the sea and wealth, and his children, Freya, a god of peace, fertility, and good harvest, and Freya, the goddess of love, beauty, and war. The 9 worlds and Yggdrasil. The cosmos was envisioned as a great ash tree, Yggdrasil, which connected 9 distinct worlds. At its base lay 3 roots, each leading to a different realm. Asgard was the home of the Aesir. Vanaheim was the home of the Vanir. Midgard, the world of humans, was a fortress built from the eyebrows of the slain giant Ymir to protect humanity from the giants. Jotunheim was the land of the giants, the eternal enemies of the gods. Niflheim was a realm of primordial ice and mist, and Muspelheim a realm of fire. Svartalfheim was the home of the dwarves, master smiths who lived underground. Alfheim was the home of the light elves, and Helheim was the underworld realm of the dead who did not die in battle, ruled by the goddess. Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods, unlike the linear view of time in Christianity, the Norse cosmos was on a fixed cycle leading to a cataclysmic, inescapable end. Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods. This great battle was prophesied to begin with a terrible winter, the Fimbulwinter, followed by the breakdown of all social bonds. The wolf Fenrir would break free and devour Odin. Thor would kill the world serpent Jormungandr, but would die from its venom. Loki would lead an army of the dead and the fire giants against the gods. Almost all the gods would die, the world would be consumed by fire and sink beneath the waves. Yet the story did not end in total despair. A new world would rise from the sea, green and fertile, and a handful of surviving gods would meet, and the cycle would begin anew. The Viking Age did not end with a single battle, but with a slow, transformative process, the Christianization of Scandinavia. As Viking raids brought wealth and contact with Christian Europe, the old ways began to change. Christian missionaries traveled north, and Norse kings began to see the political advantages of adopting the religion of their powerful neighbors. A unified Christian kingdom was easier to rule than a collection of pagan chieftains. The conversion was a gradual and often pragmatic process. Old Norse beliefs and Christian practices coexisted for decades. It was common for a Viking to be baptized, but still swear by Thor, or to pray to Christ for protection on a sea voyage, while making an offering to the old gods for a good harvest. The traditional date for the end of the Viking Age is 1066. In September of that year, the Norwegian king Harald Hardrada, a legendary Viking warrior, invaded England. He was defeated and killed by the English king Harold Godwinson at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. It was a bloody and decisive end to centuries of Scandinavian intervention in England. Just 3 weeks later, Harold Godwinson himself was defeated by William the Conqueror at the Battle of Hastings, an event that would transform England and mark the beginning of a new era. The Viking raids stopped, but the legacy of the Norse people was only just beginning to be woven into the fabric of Europe. They had founded cities like Dublin and York. Their descendants, the Normans, would go on to conquer England, Sicily, and reshape the map of Europe. Their parliament, the Althing in Iceland, is one of the oldest in the world. They had explored and settled Iceland, Greenland, and even attempted a colony in North America 500 years before Columbus. Conclusion: more than a myth, The Vikings were far more complex than the horned helmet brutes of popular imagination. They were a people of paradoxes, fierce raiders and skilled traders, ruthless warriors and meticulous craftspeople, worshippers of war gods and tellers of poignant, beautiful stories about the end of the world. They were farmers who became pirates, explorers who became settlers, and pagans who became Christians. Their world was one of harsh realities, but also of deep beauty, where a finely wrought sword was worth more than gold, and where a well-crafted verse could grant a warrior immortality. The Vikings live on, not just in museums and history books, but in our language, our legal systems, and the very DNA of millions of people across the Northern Hemisphere. They remind us that history is never simple, and that to truly understand a people, we must look beyond the violence of the raid to the quiet resilience of the farm, the skill of the shipwright, and the profound vision of the poet. They were the Norsemen, the people of the north, and their world was one of voyages, not just of conquest, but of discovery, adaptation, and enduring legacy.